the focus today is around how do we practically deal with the situation that we're facing. So I'll just ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Max, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Max Whitehead. I'm the Managing Director of the Whitehead Group. Lisa and I are bitter opponents. No, we get on very, very well. We are competitors, but we share a lot of information together, so it's very helpful, and I admire her a lot. So, I do a lot of public relations, but also publicity, and I get into I'm on the radio tomorrow night with Magic Talk just for an hour for talkback, all those sort of things. And so these issues have been thoroughly aired in that forum, and I'm comfortable with that.
Cool. And Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Mark Todd. I run Ockham Residential. We're a vertically integrated property developer with about 80 staff, primarily in construction, architecture, and project management, and a small sales team as well. So we've got various interfaces with the public and with literally hundreds of subcontractors daily. So yeah, interesting times.
Thank you for that. Well, just by way of kind of introduction to today's session, the no job, no jab argument is reigning hard at the moment, it has to be said. And we've got a bunch of things going on. Even since I sent the newsletter about 10 days ago, we've had the Beehive announce that they are looking at a no job, no jab, no access policy for the Beehive. Qantas yesterday announced that they are willing to fly anybody anywhere, provided you can prove you're double jabbed. We've got Air New Zealand, who've now said that all their staff have to be vaccinated, and they are currently looking into whether or not all passengers have to be vaccinated. Now, there is a quick poll that's just come up. I would be grateful if you could answer that, just so I get a feel for where people are at around this situation of the no jab, no job policy. But the reality for business owners is, irrespective of your personal opinions about vaccination or not, is as a business owner, you have a legal obligation to provide a safe working environment for your staff and visitors to your site. And you have a legal obligation to do the best by your company and acting in best due diligence. Now, there's two ways where we've obviously got the health and safety issue, but that health and safety issue may not be just within your control. It may be main contractors who actually say you're not allowed on site unless you have been jabbed. Ryman Aged Healthcare has already done that. The prisons are already talking about that. Quite a few construction companies are talking about that. So you may find that you are actually losing contracts because you haven't taken a proactive stance over this no jab, no job policy issue. So anyway, we've got some questions coming in already, which is fantastic. Thank you. So we'll get started on that Q&A. I've got a question here about whether or not the sentiments of the staff can force the business owners to make a jab, no job policy, or is this ultimately the business owner? Well, the answer to that one is ultimately yes, it is the business owner who is responsible for that, for making that final decision. However, I would strongly recommend that you take on board the feelings of your staff before you jump either way, and of your customers. So, so there's a question here I'll put for Max. Understand the obligations, but why do we not insist staff have the influenza or other such vaccinations as measles, etc.? So yeah. Max, I'll give you that one.
Good question. Your rights as an employer, one, you have to assess and keep the health and safety up, but you've also got conflicting pieces of legislation. You've got the Human Rights Act, you've got the Bill of Rights Act, and they've got the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is the paramount one that you really need to be concerned about here. So if you've got situations where you think there could be an unsafe, a potential unsafe situation, you can ask your staff the personal questions: are they vaccinated? You have a legal right to do that, because what you're doing is looking after the health and safety of the other people. Now, before you do that, you've got to have a good justification for that, particularly assessing their role. Now, what I'd recommend for every employer out there right now is to do a safety assessment. So if you've got your staff that are interacting closely with others, I mean, that others, it's not only other staff, but other clients or contractors, you have to assess that and then go back to is the vaccination safe, or unvaccinated people safe in that, and make your own decision. And that is your decision. Don't be pushed by others. You need to make that decision yourself, but you need to do it based on good facts and communicate them clearly to staff.
Thank you for that, Max. Mark, I understand that you have introduced a no jab, no job policy. How has that gone down with people that you've introduced that with?
By and large, it's gone down, I'd say, pretty well. Mm-hmm. From the construction side, we're the main contractor, so we're running 4 large sites with literally dozens of subcontractors. What we found in ringing around the owners and managers of those companies is that almost in unison, but they want us to lead, because it gives them, this is really our leadership. What's been surprising is the industry is looking for leadership. So the next tier down, we're quite happy that Auckland Construction to take a position of no jab, no job, because then it gives them, some leverage, somebody to push off the ground to say to their staff, well, look, we're working on these major jobs, and if you're not jabbed, you can't go onto an Auckland site. And so I found, almost without exception, the owners and managers of those companies were supportive of our policy of no jab, no job, because they're all facing a similar issue as we are as owners and directors of companies, about health and safety and our obligations of care for the health of the business.
And I would concur with that. I think a lot of employers, Mark, are currently waiting for other employers to take a leadership role in this. And that's where I think you're probably leading the way with this, and people are leaning over the fence and going, yeah, I'm feeling more comfortable doing it because Mark's done it. So, yeah, you're doing a great job.
I think it's sort of given the lack of leadership on this by government, I think we need to take it up ourselves collectively as business owners and get out there and do what's clearly the right thing under the health and safety obligations in particular. And for our business, it would be a nightmare for us if we had to find if I've got 100 staff, 100 people turning up to one of our jobs, which is regular, one of those turns out to be, have COVID, then the sites can be shut down. They're going to shut down the whole site with close contact tracing, and we'll be out of business for 2 weeks. And, that's, on vertical construction sites, that's extremely costly.
And you're in an ideal situation to really demonstrate to those other employers out there that, in fact, because you're interacting with potentially with other workers, other contractors, all these other people, but all these other businesses are going to have the difficulty of clients coming in and saying, are your staff vaccinated? Because I'm not making entry in here. I'm not doing business with you unless they are. Then you're going to get contractors who are saying, unless your clients are, unless your workers are vaccinated, we're not doing business with you. But again, where we started, Lisa and I had said, don't be pushed into this. It was a good question, the first one. Make your safety assessment and decide based on the facts, and the facts that are coming in at you, probably by government. Now that Lisa and I will talk a lot about a decision that's been released by the Employment Authority already, which will support you. It's giving employers more and more confidence that they can take the no jab, no job stance, but it doesn't forgive you from also requiring you to do a very thorough safety assessment.
So just picking up with Mark, just quickly with Mark, there's one of the questions here. Mark, how are you checking that people are vaccinated?
We're asking at the gate, it's pretty hard at the moment to have, there's no uniform sort of card carrying vaccine passport at present. So to be honest, it's largely a trust-based thing. We have had a number of contractors or people turning up to site saying, well, we're not vaccinated, we don't want to get vaccinated, and they've either been turned away. But we're in business too. Sometimes we're halfway through jobs, we need things done. We've had to create special health and safety plans for mornings or in particular parts of the site to deal with that. It's unfortunately it does have an interface with reality, a no jab, no job policy, or a no jab, you can't come onto other construction sites. So we're learning as we go. But we found very few people have taken the time in the construction sector, I know, because they've been looking over to see what's happening overseas. There's been, communication going on in the 5-week lockdown. We were all gearing up to come back to site. And pretty much, I would say the construction sector's vaccination rate would be higher than across the city and the adults from our experience. It's so obvious it's going to come.
I would agree. I would agree totally.
But yes, we have let some unvaccinated critical contractors on site, but we've had to, make it difficult for them, and it's difficult for us too. And over time, we'll try and tighten that. But
it really is difficult. You're business owners, and I'm one as well, and I have staff. But the difficulty is that we've got to make this hard decision, and we're going to be the ogres. We're going to be the terrible people who are enforcing it. And we're open to be litigated against those people who are anti-vax. And that, to me, is wrong. Now, our government should be assertive enough to do this for us. But currently, right now, they want us to wear the brunt of being the bad guy. And that's really what's unfortunate about this. We really do need direction from. And look, a lot of lawyers, law companies, everything are begging the government to come and be more upfront in terms of what they require from this. But it's too early. Only 40% of the population, I think it's even less than that, have had double jabs. And, I'm probably due already for a third, the backup one. So maybe I'm getting vulnerable as well. So these are the questions that are just, it's a conundrum that we're in now. And the employers are forced to make this decision, which is not easy.
Well, I'll just jump in there on going back to some of the questions. So hopefully we've answered the question of how do we know if it's legally okay to introduce a jab policy in the workplace, which is around doing the health and safety assessment. Do a thorough health and safety assessment to your business. What are the risks if COVID gets out in your business? Question here, does business continuity, can that be a reason for implementing this policy, particularly working in the FMCG market? Well, I'll pick that one up to answer. Max, there's a few more if you want to have a look at those ones, see if there's some you want to pick up there. Business continuity, the health and safety risk to a business is the health and safety risk to the individuals, to the workers, to the contractors, to the wider audience of visitors to your site. It's totally and utterly untested whether or not business continuity is a reason for implementing the policy. That is totally and utterly untested. However, it would be an interesting argument if somebody became redundant as a result of a business having to close because a company had lost contracts because they hadn't introduced a no jab, no job policy. So you need to assess that as one of the risks. Business continuity in itself, no, not a reason, but it is a potential argument if the company ends up closing because they've failed to actually act. So interesting argument there.
There's a good question here in regards to a large percentage of our population still haven't been vaccinated. And that puts enormous pressure on business, particularly where they've got key employees who are very, very precious to the business and maybe even paramount to the business. Are they going to be forced to actually remove them for failing to get vaccinated, which is outside their control? Now, that's a good question. One of the things I would lean on, so far, I think the weight is on employers to have a no jab, no job policy. But if you assess the workplace, for example, office workers, The government have given a mandate, and they've given a mandate for level 4 on how office workers could work together, or level 3, and that is a 2 metre distance apart or a metre distance apart in the workplace. Now, the government have stated, and if you've got to defend yourself, that is a safe situation to have, then maybe you could actually allow your staff members to be in that situation. You could use that criteria to defend yourself if you had to. So you need to assess what you're doing. Now, if you've got work that relates to, say, vulnerable people, like people that are aged care or something along those lines, you have got high levels of obligation to put in no jab, no job into place, so you can protect those people. So that's why the assessment will be peculiar to your business only. But you need to do a thorough one, document it, have it put aside, because that decision that Lisa and I have been that we're sitting here for said they complimented that particular government department for being thorough in that assessment. We can help you with those, and I'm sure that to do an assessment. But once you've done it, you can have a policy. But remember this: still, a majority of our population have not had double vaccination.
Just on that, we used the lockdown to get in touch with all our consultants and subcontractors, and our policy is currently, unless you've had your first jab, you can't come onto our sites. Understanding that, there's been a huge rush for vaccinations, and it's not that high a bar to get your first one done. Obviously, there's quite a big time lag for the second one. So probably another interesting thing, there's actually a conflict potential too with your obligations, to run your company and protect it. Like if our no jab, no job policy was enforced to the nth degree, then that in itself is sort of a dereliction of duty. If I can't get key tasks that literally shut down a construction site over maybe 2 workers of 100, that could be the critical task for that week. And so there is a tension here and some sort of compromise.
Not to be underestimated, Mark, you make a very, very good point there.
So, I would be literally in derelict of my duties if I had a very, very rigid no jab, no job policy on site, because, we've already had to make some exceptions and special case health and safety protocols to get those jobs done, because those particular workers weren't vaccinated, but we absolutely need to carry on with that particular task because it's on the critical path.
There's a question that's just popped up here is, can we ask people to get vaccinated if we don't have a policy? Must we give a reason for collecting this information and only use this information for its given reason? The thing with this, you don't have to have a policy to ask the question. You are allowed to ask whether or not people are vaccinated. People have the right from a privacy point of view to refuse to give that information. The question then becomes, what do you do with that information? So at this stage, my guidance, I'm suggesting a fairly softly approach of engage with your staff, find out where they're at. We need to understand, because what I'm finding with a lot of companies like Mark's that have gone out and actually asked their staff, hey, where is your stance on this? Is most of them are actually saying, hey, quite happy to tell you. Quite happy, I've got my views, quite happy to express them. Have the open discussions, gather that information. As a business owner, you can't make decisions in your own wee bubble. You actually do have to consult with your team. So that is part of the consulting, is just finding out where people are at. What you then do, if you then subsequently, if people come back and say, no, not jabbed, not going to get jabbed, you find out what sort of proportion of your workforce is on that, how many of them may be on the fence. So, might be that you've got a bunch who are on the fence or saying, I haven't really quite got round to it. And it's like, okay, cool, let's have a work outing to the local drive-in jab centre and go and get it done. So, actually helping people along the way on that journey. So in answer to the question, do you have to have a policy? No, you don't. And this one, Max, I'll pass this one to you. How long do you see the no jab, no job policy being in place? There will still be a certain percentage of the population who, maybe for medical reasons, are unable to have vaccinations, and surely they can't be kept from their chosen career forever.
Yeah, and that's a question I get on radio quite often, and I see there's another one very similar to that up there as well. It's really unfortunate, and it's like if an employee of yours gets cancer or has a serious accident and they can't work, do you have to leave that job open indefinitely for them? The answer is no, if you go through a fair process. Now, in these poor individuals, and I do feel for them, they can't take a vaccination because they're because of their particular medical condition, then, or even religious grounds, or those sort of factors. You're going to have to weigh that up in regards to the safety of the whole organization. If they present, now this is your big decision, and I know this is us, dashing away when you have to make the decision on your own, but Mark's done it. If you make the decision that you have a no jab, no job policy, you've got to be prepared to take it all the way through. An individual who is unable to get a jab may lose their job. Now, you've obviously got to first, before you get to that point, look around for alternatives. Could they wear PPE to protect them from any problems, or protect other people from them? And the other thing is, could you actually relocate them in the business to another role, as I mentioned before, administration or something like that? And in the old days, we used to talk about licking stamps in the office, or go and do some menial task. Helping make Mark a cup of tea all the time may be something you might get a job doing. But what I'm saying is, you've got to investigate that before you get to that point. And yes, those poor individuals, no fault of their own, you may have to dismiss them for no jab, no job, and because they're presenting a problem. But look at the alternatives.
So yeah, just kind of extending on from what Max is saying there. It was a very interesting comment from my doctor actually the other day, who turned around and said what she's advising people is, yes, you have the choice not to get the jab, and there may be reasons why you can't, but there will also be consequences of that. And as I said, in the same way that anybody could go out, as long as you're over the age of 17, go and get the driving license, but some jobs you can't do unless you've got a driving license.
Now, there's another good question there, Lisa, if you don't mind me jumping in here.
Yep.
It's saying, what happens if you have a no jab, no job policy and one of the workers gets the jab and has an adverse reaction to the jab? Are you liable? And the answer is, you're always liable. Being an employer makes you liable. Look at poor Mark. It's why he's losing here. And it's not an easy role being the employer. I think you'd have a very, very good position to uphold, to justify your reasoning that you required people to get a jab. And as I mentioned before, even those unfortunate people who are too ill to get a jab, you're going to have to push the policy right through. Now, this is really difficult times, and you could face litigation, but I think you'd be in quite a defendable position. And if that person has got a reasonable advocate or lawyer acting for them, they will see that, particularly if you present it. The government are advocating it. They're setting the rules. The lawmakers are doing it. So there you are. You've got a lot in your favour. You've got case law already supporting you in that regard, and you're looking after people's safety. Now, let me just clarify something else. There's conflicting pieces of legislation out there, and you're going to get that chucked at you everywhere. So Health and Safety Employment Act, in my view, should be paramount over the other pieces of law, like the Bill of Rights, where a person can refuse it. They can. It's their choice. You don't force them to get the jab. You're saying, if you don't want to get the jab, your choice, but there may not be a role here for you. We'll look into it, but there may not be a role here for you. So, in my view, health and safety is going to come first, and that's what's happened offshore. We're seeing cases come out of all sorts around the world right now, which is saying, no, safety, people's safety is first.
And yeah, I'll just add to that, Max, it's the safety of everybody. So it's, yes, you might have one person in the organization who cannot be jabbed for whatever reason, but you have to protect the safety of the many. You also have to protect the safety of the public, visitors to your site. So it is the safety of the many, which is unfortunately, for those people who are in a situation where they can't get jabbed for whatever reason, yeah, they may have to look at changing careers.
Now, one thing I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be legislation over there. Legislation. There's going to be a lot of litigation over this, a lot of court cases. Yeah. People are going to be sued. Don't let it be you. It's hellish expensive, and only special people can do it. And there'll be advocates out there trying to make a name for themselves, and one already has. She tried in the High Court early this week and was thrown out. But you're going to come across that, so be cautious of that. Now, my view is that if we got a case that came up and said, "Oh, you can't ask people to vaccinate," that's fine. You've made a decision. In the absence of that decision, of that legal decision, you could still justify your actions. But if that came about, you wait for this government. It will legislate fast, absolutely terrifically fast, to say it's mandatory for vaccinations. I'm sure of that. So I think we're going to see a lot more to come. At the moment, they'd rather Mark make the dirty decision for them than they would. And I'm saying all employers to make their dirty decisions rather than saying the nasty things to people. Hey, you better get vaccinated or you don't have a job or you can't enter any premises hereafter. Now, they're hinting at it and they're pretty close to it. And already they're getting employers to do the nasty decisions, as Lisa touched on earlier. And that is that if you don't have a scanning facility in your business, or you let people enter your business without scanning or signing in, wait for this. Jail sentence up to 6 months and also a $4,000 fine. That's for employers and business owners. That's the sort of thing the government will do to us to mandate vaccinations.
Max, just to pick up, there's a question here. You referred to the recent case, so you're referring to the border worker case there. Can you just expand a little bit on that one for everybody, please?
Sure. So there's two things. What the Employment Relations Authority, which is a low-level judiciary in New Zealand, it goes Employment Relations Authority, the Employment Court, then it goes up the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. Now, that's how the levels go. Now, in that particular case, it was customs, wasn't it? Border control.
Customs, border control.
So what the government have done is saying it's mandate for border control workers, frontline border control workers, to be vaccinated. So it's mandatory in those particular areas. This worker was not at the front line. So they were back, which is, yes, I really like that, because this is a situation close to what all employers are facing and Mark's facing. And so then they assessed that, and they said two things to look at was health and safety and, of course, that order from the court. They all had to be vaccinated. And this worker still refused, even though actually the worker's not anti-vax. So I don't understand all that, but that doesn't matter in this particular case. And then what the court said, well, the employment authority said, and they made this a major decision, there's a few of them on board with this, that a thorough safety assessment had been done before they'd gone through making that ultimate decision of dismissal. And then the other factor was they looked at all alternatives, genuinely looked at them, and you need to have evidence of that. So safety assessment, and there's a guideline for WorkSafe put out for those safety assessments with a criteria. So there is a bit of a guide in that. There wasn't before, but it's coming out now, and it is out there. And the other thing is that you need to make sure you've documented everything thoroughly, the safety assessment, and also look at deployment to some other area if it's possible. Making Mark's cups of tea is a big one, I think.
Thanks for that, Max. There's a question come in here. What about clients visiting our office? Can we stop them from visiting if they are not jabbed? How could we do that? Well, at this point in time, we've got a couple of things here around. We haven't got as far as the jab yet, but in Australia, the New South Wales Premier has already come out saying that businesses will face significant fines if they serve somebody who is not vaccinated. That's a health and safety issue. That's what they've said in New South Wales, and I suspect that is coming our way. In the UK, Holland, places like that, they already have vaccine passports, and you cannot go out to dinner unless you produce your vaccine passport. It is coming our way. The only reason, I personally think the only reason we haven't actually got it yet is because it's only in the last 4 to 5 weeks that we've actually said anybody over the age of 12 can be vaccinated. So give it another 2 weeks. All those people could be on second vaccine, and I suspect that's when we're going to start seeing it. So
I suspect there'd be civil disobedience if they enforced it now, because 60% of our population are not double jabbed. And I'm double jabbed, and as I said before, I'm due for my backup jab. And in fact, I think I'm overdue now. So there he goes. I could be exempt as well, and that makes it even 40% is reducing very quickly now. So, I mean, I would say there'd be civil disobedience on that. I would say there'd be rioting in the streets, and people will be demanding their freedom. So it's possible it can happen. We've seen it happening in Australia, and the violence and terrible things happening over there. But those Aussies, we know they're built differently to us and can't play rugby.
And a couple of questions here. Do staff have to sign in via the Tracer app or visitor and contractors only? Now, the legal obligation under the public health order is that you have to display the app and you have to keep a record of who is on site when. So employee, yes, if you don't have timesheets or something like that, yes, you probably should be using the COVID Tracer app for your staff. And that public health order, breach of it can mean 6 months in jail. Serious fine and serious fines for employers.
Which I think is obtuse. It's very difficult because that's doing a policing job for our government, and they're dodging a bullet by getting the employers to be the ugly guys again. And I suspect if you see that, what the point Lisa and I are making, particularly, pushing that home to you, is there's new laws about to come, and they're going to be doing it again, where they'll make the employer the bad guy who'll enforce these things. So there's no doubt in my mind that's what's about to come. And the Australian legislation, by the way, the Health and Safety at Work Act we have in New Zealand is based on the Australian one. So already the Premier of New South Wales, as Lisa just said, has made a warning to all those guys. You will be sued. You will face significant fines if you serve anybody in your premises who's not vaccinated. Now, who runs over here the policing of the health and safety is WorkSafe. Who owns and runs that? Our government. So I think it's about to happen. WorkSafe, we need to watch them very closely in terms of how far they're going to go with this. But it's possible that they will force people to get vaccinated, or otherwise they're going to be excluded from society by not being allowed to go anywhere.
Just quickly picking up on a question that's come on, will that include supermarkets denying people who don't have vaccination? Look, I don't know. The mask wearing thing that was introduced initially as you have to wear a mask in the supermarket, they quickly U-turned and put in an exemption to say that unless you can't for health reasons, and you can't, and ultimately that was introduced because you can't deny people access to basic rights. So yes, you probably
Lisa, the government have said publicly that they're looking at it. Now, I know they're looking at everything. That seems to be their common answer. But the facts are, I mean, supermarkets is an obvious one, but there's a lot of other areas as well. Rest home workers, anyone who's dealing with vulnerable right now, that's an obvious area. Nurses, doctors, all those people. I can see a list coming, and very, very soon. But they can't afford to do it now because only 40% of our population are actually at that vaccination level that they want.
Thank you for that, Max. Yep, sorry.
I was just going to say, like in general, I know there's a lot of fear around litigation and where you may end up. I think it's very clear what your obligations are as a director under health and safety. But there's no need to be cavalier and firing staff left, right, and centre. There's a process to go through, and you do need to be thoughtful. You do need to be communicative. But I don't think there's any need for fear. It's very clear that a no jab, no job policy is justifiable and supportable, and quite honestly, the logical outcome given the pandemic that we're currently living through. We haven't seen a proper pandemic for 100 years. It's quite an easy decision to make, and I just want to reassure employers out there that you're not going to end up in difficult court cases over a no jab, no job policy. as long as you're not cavalier at the process that will play out over the next 2 to 3 months. When you do identify staff members in critical roles that won't get on board, you may well end up in court. But I don't think you're going to have history or the law on the wrong side, provided you're just not rash and a bully about it. Just want to give people the confidence. It's a clear decision. It's easy to make, and I don't think there's a lot going against you. Just as long as you're not cavalier about it and you do take the time to listen and look at alternatives.
God, that's good, Mark. I think I compliment you on that, because it really is reassuring to hear from someone who's actually been there and done it.
I'm not fearful of the legal side of it, I'm sensitive to the personal side, of course, because, but I don't think it's not actually that hard a decision. It's the emotional weight of that decision that affects me most of anything else. It's not a nice thing to turn people away or turn subcontractors away or initiate a discussion with a staff member that may be refusing to get vaccinated, but you just have to deal with that. It's the emotional stuff that's the hard side. I don't think the legal and assessment side's all that difficult at all. It's a pandemic. 5 million people have died around the planet. We're just lucky it hasn't come here yet. But it's fairly clear where your obligations lie. I just want to reinforce that, because it's really easy to go down hypotheticals and rabbit holes. The central issue here is we're in a pandemic, a deadly pandemic that has killed 5 million people around the planet.
And thank you very much for that, Mark. I know from previous experience of working with Mark for many years, that's a very, very genuine answer. And Mark does take it very seriously, that human aspect to making these decisions, and works through them very, very well with people, without fear of the law, about doing the best by the welfare of all of his staff. And carries the weight of a lot of mortgages on his shoulder.
There's a couple of good comments on there, Lisa. May I come in and respond?
Yeah, if you like.
Okay, and there is a couple there where it says, my particular industry should be treating this in different ways, and I think that's right. While Mark's in an industry which is cheap, as you guys do everything and anything, but certainly in other areas like digital marketing, someone's got in here, and when they're working from home, the no jab, no job policy probably is not relevant to you. So you do need to do that thorough assessments. That's an obvious one when people are working from home, but you need to assess your workplace particularly. And as I said, Lisa and myself are always here to help you do that and give you guidance in regards to that. But ultimately, the decision, as it was with Mark, lies with you. And as you hear, Mark, gosh, I admire you, Mark. I think that rational voice will just take the hysteria out of it and make a rational decision based on the facts you have at hand. But you must go out of your way to make sure you assemble those facts properly. And a health and safety assessment is necessary. We can't jam that down your throats anymore, but it really is necessary.
Mark, I don't know how well you can answer this off the cuff, but it's one of the questions that's come up. So if you can't answer it, that's fine. But what factors did you use to assess the health and safety risk for your business?
Oh, well, it's the deadliest pandemic in 100 years. It is a pandemic. The virus does kill people. People that are unvaccinated are more likely to be unknowingly carrying and spreading the virus. And that's the primary risk from the health and safety point of view. And being in construction, it's my worst nightmare if one of 100 people turns up. Like, I could easily have one of these cases, 45 cases in Auckland yesterday, been on my construction site. I've got it shut down. It costs us about $100,000 a week to have a construction site shut down. A tower crane sitting up in the air is $15,000 a week. Let alone all the other things that you've got on site that are discontinue, whether the site's shut down or not. So, from a health and safety point of view, it's really clear that the primary issue is that if you're unvaccinated, you're more likely to spread the virus in the business and affect the health and safety of other people's lives. Like, it is a deadly pandemic. Let's not just get into this Bill of Rights shit. It's 100 years since we've had a proper pandemic. We just, thankfully, because we were so far away, we managed to more or less keep it out. And we haven't had thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of deaths, or millions of deaths like, we've seen around the world. But it doesn't make it any less of a deadly pandemic. Otherwise, we wouldn't have spent $50 billion, keeping our country safe and shutting our borders. It's too abstract in a way, I think, for business owners, because we haven't had a lot of deaths here. But it doesn't change the health and safety. The central issue is that if you're unvaccinated, you're more likely to catch it and spread it. And it's that dangerous phase where you unknowingly spread it, which is the big issue for us.
Thank you for that, Mark. And totally agree with you. It is that dangerous phase. Now, a question there. I've got a question from a recruitment company who place temps and contractors onto client sites. A number of those clients are asking for vaccinated people to be provided. It's mostly office-based work. Is this a reasonable request, and whose responsibility is it to do the role safety assessment? Max, do you want that one?
Yeah, sure. Again, that's a hard one, because you need to be perhaps where you've got a client that doesn't want to. You're placing perhaps temps into an organisation, and they don't want unvaccinated people in there. Perhaps that's the scenario that you're suggesting. In that particular case, what I would think you'd do is ask them to assess their workplace and say to them, we're happy to provide PPE, we're happy to provide masks, we're happy to provide whatever is necessary. Could you provide a 2-metre distance from the next person? Could we give an undertaking that they have scheduled tea breaks so they don't interact closely with other people? If we went through all that criteria, would that satisfy you and your requirement at the workplace? And ultimately, if they said no, then you're back to the hard decision. If you've got you can't place them into that workplace, well, then and there's no other work for that individual, well, then maybe you're going to have to say goodbye. Now, remembering, if you're a recruitment agency or a temping agency, particularly temping agencies, you're still vulnerable to personal grievances, even though you're not the direct employer. So there's been a change of the law quite a year ago, I think, wasn't it, Lisa? Whereupon you could be held in responsibility for unjustified dismissal. So do your paperwork, do your assessment, make your best attempt for that employee, see if there's other roles available before you come to that response. Lisa, have I answered the question?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, ultimately it is the main contractor, the main client's choice. They can say, we don't want unvaccinated people here. Same way that supermarkets, healthcare companies, construction sites, main contractors are setting down rules that they have decided this is the terms of my contract. And they can set ultimately as a main contractor, they're not governed by employment law or health and safety law or anything like that. They don't have to justify why everybody has to wear pink fluffy hats. They can just rule.
It's fairly clear. It's easy to do the banning.
Yeah.
and enforce the banning. The issue is from a health and safety point of view, when that arises, if you're turning away staff members from coming into the office, the discussions around an alternative viable employment path or dismissal, that's where the rubber hits the road. And from a contracting point of view, banning subcontractors off the site that are unvaccinated, where the rubber hits the road, as I've already sort of alluded to, when you've got a key task that needs to be done now, and the only subcontractor or the guy that's contracted to do it, or you might be in line for a significant delay that is very costly if you rigidly take a sort of a rigid view on that. Our vaccine policy, no jab, no site entry, is enforced 100%. There has to be other things. We have to come back on a Saturday morning, or we'll clear that part of the site for 3 hours while those unvaccinated workers do a key task. There's, because you've got conflicting responsibilities there, and your policy of no entry, no jab, no entry, those are where the interesting discussions happen. From health and safety, it's around discussions about ending the employment or changing the terms of employment. And on site, it's whether if I rigidly enforce this policy, will it damage the financial viability of my business to a certain extent that the policy is unsafe under my obligations as a director for the financial health of the company. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty horrible position to be in as a director.
It is.
where, dogged. It's a balance again, People are a bit too afraid. Like, there's balance here. People don't have to be afraid that no jab, no job means every second person's going to be fired or out of a job.
And the indications are right now, you'd be, if you were challenged, Mark, and it's always possible, that you would be in a pretty strong position, because right now we've got a court case which supports you. We've got the government, which is making laws that are actually proposing the same and making public comments every day that vaccination is necessary to keep us safe. And you're taking an action to keep us safe. I think you're on the right track. And if you we're faced with litigation, I think you'll find that people will be sadly mistaken by actually challenging you, because they could end up having to pay your legal costs.
Well, look, we've got a couple more questions here. I'm just going to see if we can get finish off these last few ones here. So just in a physio, acupuncture, massage clinic, so definitely can't work 2 meters apart. So I think for us mandatory staff, patients coming in need to be vaccinated for health and safety. Your thoughts? I'd have to say I agree with you. Yes, I think that you can't put other things in place to protect the environment. You can't have the 2 meter distancing or anything. So yeah, I would have to say that say introducing a no jab, no job policy in that place is fairly clear. We run large events and smaller workshops. Can we legally say no jab, no attend? Well, this is coming back to the point of employees versus how you deal with employees versus what rules you set for those visitors to your location. And ultimately, you can set whatever rules you like for coming up, but you have to, as Mark has already said, you have to think about what is the impact of that. So if you're saying that, well, you can't attend the course and can't pay to come and attend my course because you are not vaccinated, then what's that going to do? But then by the same token, the was it Bailey's Real Estate, and there was Mitre 10 awards dinner that were two big events that happened just before we went into lockdown, and I think that put Hilary Barry amongst a lot of other faces in lockdown because of one barman who did both events who had COVID. So yeah, you need to think about how fast this Delta variant spreads. So therefore, do you need to make it compulsory for your staff? Again, it's taking it back to doing the risk assessment for your business.
All indications are that we're going to be on lockdown a lot longer in Auckland. So because of yesterday's numbers, I wouldn't be surprised today's numbers will even be up there. It's sad. It's a sad fact, and it must be bloody crippling for a lot of small business people out there. So you have my empathy. But you've got to try and manage your way through it. I think listen to what Mark's been doing, and his soft and rational approach, I think, is the way to do it. Be thorough, be careful, but also look at the logic of it. And that's how Mark's running his business, is making logical decisions based on the facts around him. So do the assessment, come up with a conclusion, and drive it with confidence, as Mark is doing, I think. And Lisa and I are there to help you.
Cool. Well, look, I think at that we will wind up. There's a few questions we haven't been able to get to, but they look like they're fairly in-depth, detailed ones. Max and myself are absolutely here to help. I'd like to just wind up. Mark, would you like to, any final closing comments, please?
Oh, no, I just understand for those employers out there, it's a challenging place to be, and I just want to reiterate, I don't think there's much legal jeopardy you get into by being quite firm on what your vaccination policy is. The emotional harm, or the toll, is quite taxing. On the bright side, I think Max is right that within 3 or 4 months, we should have clearer backup from central government, at least I hope we should, and that's the message that I'd like everyone out there in the ether at the moment, to make sure you let the politicians know this is a critical issue, that it really should be led from the top. We should do ourselves as employers leading, but I do think it'll only be 3 or 4 months of uncertainty. So try not to lose too many sleepless nights over. Just make sensible decisions and don't be in too much of a hurry to follow them through to the nth degree. That will happen, and things will clarify, I would say, the next few months.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for giving your time, Todd. Mark.
Anytime, thank you.
Max, and yeah, if you join us, any closing comments, and also how can people get in touch with you?
Well, it's like the Beatles song, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Look at what Mark's just said. Make a rational decision, be clear-headed, be brave, go ahead, make your decisions, but stick to it. And in a few months' time, we could see some changes and perhaps some leadership. Oh, maybe not, but leadership from our government. But fingers crossed, folks, and lean on Lisa and I, because we're there for you. And you're not alone with these things. And listening to Mark, you can see the experience that we've got here. And I think that's probably must be giving you comfort today.
And thank you very much indeed, guys, for attending. So my final words on this one are: get in touch, talk to people, do your health and safety assessment, talk to your staff, have open and honest discussions. Yes, this is a very moving feast, and God, it's changed in the 10 days since I wrote the newsletter inviting people to attend this. So, yeah, keep in touch, be open to what's going on, though.
I was hoping you weren't going to say be kind.
No. It's a dirty phrase now, isn't it? Even I don't use the words anymore. I feel horrible.
Thank you very much indeed, guys.
Nice. Just a couple of things from me, Lisa. The recording, someone asked about the recording. Great work, team. Mark, Max, Lisa, awesome. I enjoyed that. Someone asked about the recording, whether it's going to be sent out. The answer is yes, as far as I'm aware. So you'll all get that. There was also a couple of questions in the Q&A that we didn't get a chance to get to that I saw. If you still have those questions, fire them through to Lisa or Max. I'm sure they're more than happy to help. And yeah, cool. See you on the next one, I reckon. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Max. Thanks, Mark.